Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps, and coming back with another week of arena updates. I think this week, because we haven't really talked about it in previous weeks, I think it was just a timing issue, but I really want to talk about some of the players who have been making waves with this
Oh
110
yeah. Well, we
challenge.
didn't talk about it last week because I didn't want to jinx it, right? Like we were
Yeah,
like right on the cusp of the first major breakthrough in the 110 thing since we last talked about Hafu.
yes. No, but all right. So, anyways, a little bit of information for those of you who don't know what we're talking about. The 110 challenge is an arena challenge devised by Amaz where you need to get 100 arena victories in 10 runs. So, for if you can't do math, that is 10 win average over 10 runs, which is extraordinary, right?
Hmm.
That is just you need a lot of skill and a lot of luck combined.
So no
Um,
one averages remotely close to 10 wins per run, like on long-term basis. No one even averages close to 9. Like
yeah,
you kind of can get close to 8. I think is if you're playing all classes evenly. I think you can like even perfect play from a perfect player gets like to 8 maybe, and no one's doing that because no one's perfect.
right. So, um, the second rule of the challenge is that you have to pick a class that you haven't played before if that is in one of the options. Now, you could get very lucky and just get Rogue, Mage, Paladin every single run, and you don't have to pick anything else, right? But if on one of those runs a Shaman pops up or a Hunter pops up, you have to pick that Shaman or Hunter if you haven't played that class before. So there's a little bit of luck there as well, but it usually spreads out the classes. And by the end of the run, if you're lucky enough to be on the 10th run, you would have played, I would say, at least, 7 of the 9 classes, right?
Yep.
So that's the challenge. And people have been trying to do this since late December. I remember that's when Amaz sort of put this out there. People have been doing it to some limited success.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah,
When Hafu got like 90, she ended up with what, like 90, 91,
86.
86. Okay.
86 was the record, which broke Amaz's record of 69. But in the past 2 weeks, there have been a lot of activity on this challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Ratsma on his rampage, where he vows to be the best Hearthstone's arena streamer, once again, recently got 93, only to be upstaged by Hafu, who
Like
one
like
week later.
2 days later.
Yeah, I was
Like
about to say
this
one
is
week,
just
but
ridiculous. This is just ridiculous. Like so, we didn't talk about it last week because Ratsmai was like on his like 7th or 8th run or something, and was already looking really good.
yeah,
He ended up floundering on his last run because it was Warrior that he picked, and he got a really bad draft, and then people sniped him.
right.
So
But
that run went 1-3. So he was like so well on track before that.
I know. But to give you guys the full update, so it was Hafu with the high score of 86 beating Amasa 69, and then Ratsma beat it with a 93, and then Hafu, this is most recent
Most
news,
recently.
beat Ratsma's score with a 96, and that is the high score right now.
Yep. Yep.
So that's the entire picture, and it's just crazy sort of the movement that we've been getting with this challenge because it is extremely hard,
Mm-hmm.
and we've seen sort of the difficulties, not just averaging 10 over 10 runs, not just picking sort of the classes as well, but also we definitely saw there were a few jitters, right? I think
Yeah.
if you ask both parties involved, they will admit that there was sort some nervousness, there was some anxiety involved, and also you always get into the question of sniping and ghosting, right?
Right. I mean, it got to the point, and I totally supported Hafu for doing where after she got like 4-1 on her with a really good paladin deck too, for her last run. I think everybody that she put it up to a Twitter vote, and it ended up being like 65-70% in favor of like putting a 10-minute, 15-minute delay on the stream, just to like prevent the snipers from getting a bigger upper hand than knowing her deck.
Yeah.
And even then, I think that one still ended at 6, and so she didn't quite make the 110. But this is just a lot of the pressure gets on you. It's not like she's like, she hasn't been pressured before. She used to be a tournament player. Like she used to be like a competitive esports player, and
Right.
even now she like participates in like Lord of the Arena and things like that. So uh, there's a lot of things going on, but you know, kudos to them. They Ratsma and Hafu are both now in the 90 plus club of the 90 out of 100.
Right. So that leaves sort of this big question, I think. And I'm gonna ask you, Advocate, do you think anyone will ever get there?
Okay, I didn't think people would get this close. I didn't think
Okay.
that was even
Yeah.
going to be
That's
possible because
yeah.
they're not. It's not like they're like you know sitting in a basement, not streaming this or playing this on off hours. They're like advertising this.
Right.
So like
Right.
once you get to like 7 wins or whatever, you have like 4 or 5 thousand people watching you on Twitch. You're getting sniped left and right.
Yes.
Like that's why I found it amazing that any of them even got that far. I think if I got to like on my 7th run, if I got there, I would already be putting up a delay, just to not screw around with it. But like Ratsman never put on a delay. Hafu only put it on like halfway through her final run.
Right.
It's a I don't know, like for the challenge, right? It's kind of like a meta issue. It's not like the game at that point. It's the challenge, and it's how other people interact with the game, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's a built-in part of the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. I didn't think people would come this close, but my answer, it's the same that I've always said. I don't think people, like anyone, will complete the challenge because of partly because of the reasons that you stated, right?
Hmm.
Where the higher you get, the more hype there's built around this thing. I'm sure, like if you reach the last run, there's going to be hundreds of people gunning for you,
Yeah.
right? They're just going to try to go for it, and it's just kind of Twitch, Reddit, human nature to do something like this.
Hmm.
And also
Yeah, and yeah,
because
people in the chat right now are talking about how they're playing on like different accounts. Oh yeah, they were definitely not playing on the account that said Ratsma and Hafu, because then you're
right,
not just being sniped. Then you're being
right,
like you're inviting people basically to come
right.
snipe you.
But
So,
there's
but
no way
still, like if you're
to
someone who's actually sniping, right? You're like watching the
right.
stream and you're like waiting to queue up against them, which works like it works surprisingly well after you
It
get to a
does.
certain win rate.
Yep.
Like you're still gonna get sniped. They know you're on a Smurf account.
Right. It doesn't matter if you have hundreds of people, randomly, spinning a wheel to try to take a shot at you. One
Hmm.
of those is going to hit, right? A decent amount of times. But also, I don't think anyone's going to complete it just because this challenge has a shelf life. It's not a challenge or sort of an event that's going to go on forever. Other things are going to pop up. People will just get tired of it, and I think in a few months, like the
Wait,
arena streamers will move on to either just streaming normal arena or just move on to something else, and this thing will potentially just die off.
I don't know. I don't think all that much happens in the arena world. Like on that kind of speed. I think this will be like around for at least the whole year, if not like, many years. I think this is the first time that anyone's issued any kind of challenge for the arena along any kind of lines. Like who else is going to be out there issuing a challenge for arena, right? Like, I don't know.
That's
Um
fair. I think people will just get tired of it, right?
no.
We're in sort of a
What do arena streamers do anyway? They stream arena. It's not
sure,
like they're going out of their
sure.
way to do this challenge. Too much, at least.
No, no, definitely not. But I do think after you do something for a while, you sort of because it still restricts you in a way, right? It restricts you
In
in
class selection, that's it.
exactly.
I don't care too much about that. I think
I
people.
think other people do.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's true. Some people may just like get annoyed of having to like play classes they don't want to play,
Yeah,
but it also it gets because you can still do the challenge and not pick the best classes. No one says you have to pick the best classes. You just can't be repeating classes.
yeah,
So I don't know. I think people will continue to do it and just like not bill it as 110 until they get close. Like maybe after they'll keep the philosophy but not really like continuously pick mage paladin rogue if they get bored of it, but then if they do hit up on like 70 wins or something, then they'll go back into 110 mode.
yeah.
um
But until then, like I eagerly anticipate what's happening with this, and who knows? Like we could come back next week, and three people would have beaten it, right? Or
no,
something crazy.
no,
Who
It's
knows?
so hard. It's incredibly difficult.
It is. I agree. I agree.
Um, okay. Anyway, let's go to the deep fried meta. Congrats to both Ratsuma and Hafu for just
Yep.
doing like already getting to 90 something. It's ridiculous. It's
Oh,
like that's like that means they have played different classes while averaging like 9.5 plus wins per run for a decent enough stretch to be a non-ridiculously tiny sample size, right? So
yep.
that's quite an accomplishment. Okay, so in today's deep fried meta, I kind of want to go into a juicier topic than we've been doing before, because we're in the point between like kind of meta stable. We're between expansions. We're probably not going to get information for the next expansion for like a month or something, especially because Blizzard just announced the whole standard format change. So we're going to take this time to really kind of dig into some like gameplay topics. So we're going to call it deep fried meta, but it really doesn't have as much to do with the meta as it does have to do with how to beat the meta. And the topic we're going to cover today is how and when you protect minions. We generally talk, and I know we're very quote-unquote guilty of it, it's just the way we prefer to talk. We talk in terms of the macro picture. We talk in terms of like tempo. We talk in terms of getting resources and of getting cards, tempo, face damage, when to flip the board, all of that stuff. It's tempo focus and it's card advantage focus, and it deals with the bigger picture, where if you end up maximizing your stuff, and you end up maximizing your stuff on the board, and you end up maximizing your damage to your opponent's face in the right ratios, you're going to win the game. But there's a whole micro element to it, which is about how the attacks and defenses and the things on the board match up. That doesn't exactly, or only ancillarily, have to do with the big picture. And this is a topic I want to cover today, because we just haven't talked too much about it. And it's about protecting minions. Minions are not created equal. Some are better than others. Some are more useful to you than others, and those should be protected. As compared to other minions, or just not choosing not to protect anything. That's kind of the basic thesis. So you wanna start and kind of give this discussion a little bit of a shape.
Sure. Yeah. I think because we just put this out there and it's some
Yeah.
like grand big idea. So what we mean about
All of our ideas are grand and big, Merps.
that is true. Wow. Wow. That's a bit uplifting in a way, right? So I think the question you want to ask, like, what do you mean by protecting minions, right? Like, what do you do? There's two ways of protecting minions.
So I would say protecting minions is about making sure the minion you're talking about remains alive, preferably for more than one turn, even more preferably for multiple turns.
Right. And so I think that's a good way to frame it. And then today we're going to be talking about like the ways we can do that, right? And there are so many ways. And we can also separate this into minions that are out there on the board already versus minions that are still in your hand.
Okay.
And we'll break that down as well, because and you might be thinking, well, wait, if it's in your hand, it's already protected. But you want to be thinking ahead, right? You always want to be planning ahead, and you want to be thinking, is this the correct time to play the minion if it's from your hand? And if it's already on the board, you want to think, what actions can I take to further protect it on the board,
Yep.
And then after that, it's kind of like, so you want to protect this minion, but you also want to go into the why. It's like, why do I want to protect this? Like, is it to just get more value? Do I need to protect it to get more face damage? So these are the questions that you want to think about when you just put out this general idea.
So let's do it piece by piece. What's your first question?
Okay, so how do you protect minions on the board? I want to separate it by board versus your hand.
Okay, you're gonna start with the how and not the why.
You should probably start with the why. That makes a lot more sense.
Okay. Let's build this up. All right, let's start with the why.
Okay.
So why are we protecting the minions? What good is a minion staying on the board an extra turn? And protecting a minion isn't free. It's never free. You have to use some kinds of resources to protect the minions, and that's kind of the how, right? But we don't have to get into the mechanical part of it first. Let's go with our goals. A minion you would protect, let's say, a demolisher is an engine. It will repeatedly give you value for each turn that it's alive. And so the more turns that you keep it alive, the more value you're going to get out of it. And Demolisher seems like a very obvious example because it says at the start of your turn. So for more start of your turns that happen, the Demolisher gets more value. it's not a terribly hard concept. But there are other things that are a little more sneaky in terms of just getting more value each turn it's alive. Something like a Direwolf Alpha or a Stormwind Champion, right? That basically means for every minion that you put on the board, when you have this minion on the board, it gets like an extra attack, and a defense. So that's also, it's the same thing, really, as a Demolisher. It just doesn't say at the start of your turn. And so those are also things you would want to keep alive. And, things that happen on attack, like the Cup Purse, for example, you want to keep alive. Anything with a passive ability, you can consider keeping alive. And the degree to which you want to keep it alive is going to be how much it's helping you, right? So what the effect is and what it'll cost you to achieve the effect. Like, let's say you have a Sorceress Apprentice. It's good, but then you have no more spells left. Well, it's not all that much value to you anymore, right?
Yeah.
So that's like the most basic thing of why you want to keep a minion alive. But there's also a whole other reason you may want to keep a minion alive. It may just be a really good minion.
Yeah.
And it may suit your goals better than other minions that you could presumably trade instead of this minion. So, for example, if you have a Salty Dog on the board, you can deal 7 damage per turn just keeping that minion alive. Don't hurt it, don't do anything for it. 7 face damage is a good bonus to have, right?
Right. It's the reason Salty Dog exists, right? If you have the Salty Dog there, you're going face with it a lot of times.
Yeah. So it doesn't have an ability. It doesn't say at the start of your turn, Salty Dog will deal X damage to your opponent's face. It doesn't say, as long as Salty Dog is on the board, your opponent loses health. But it might as well say that. And so that's also a minion you may consider trying to keep alive more than you would normally, especially if you have a face-oriented agenda. And on the other hand, it used to be such a clear-cut case. I loved using the Paladin for this, and now with Oldemon you can't. But like with a Paladin, before, you would want to keep a big minion above 5 health or above, just like on the board, because that can take care of anything, because it can't be removed. So you would want to protect, like, it would be a paradox, right? You normally want to use your big minions to trade down, but against a Paladin, you would want to keep one minion at really high health. Flame Strike, still follows that consideration, except Mage also has hard removal, so it kind of is iffy. But if you have a large board, you want to keep your 6 health plus minion at 6 health plus against a Mage. So if you do get Flame Strike, you're not totally screwed. Like, you're going to trade your smaller minions to avoid that.
Yeah. I guess the closest now that you can't use Paladin, I guess it would be Druid. They still don't really have hard removal other than
they have 5 damage from Starfire.
Right. But you put out Boulder Fist Ogre against the Druid, that's the cleanest example now.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think those are all really good reasons why you want to protect minions. And I think a lot of people see the obviousness and be like, oh, well, if I have an engine, obviously I want to keep it alive. Your example of Demolisher. I think a lot of people have a tougher time seeing, why do I want to protect this minion if it's just vanilla, right? If it's just got nothing to it, it's easy to see the value in like, oh man, every turn I get 2 damage, or every turn I get an extra attack with something like Master Swordsmith or Direwolf Alpha, something like that. Much harder to see. And that just goes into general sort of board recognition and board awareness. But there is value in protecting your minions at that time as well.
Yeah, like every minion basically can be used to go face. So it might as well have something that says, if you don't damage me and you use my attack, deal my attack to your opponent's face at the beginning of the turn, right? So if that's useful to you, then you can just pretend your minion has that text on it.
Yep.
Because it's always one of the options. Okay, so those are the reasons why you protect a minion. And there's also this, people don't realize this a lot, but there's a false, sometimes like a false or like a misleading thing you can think with something like, what am I thinking of? Flesh-Eating Ghoul.
Yes.
Right? Like, yes, it's kind of an engine, right? You keep getting 1 attack every time something dies, but it's limited by its health. So as a minion, it doesn't function the same way that, say, a Cavaldia Raider functions, where it gains both health and attack. this minion at the end of the day will still only be good for going face. It'll deal more and more damage to the face, right? Like a micro machine or something, right? Every turn you keep it alive, it deals more damage to its face, but it never ever gains health. So it's more limited than its stats may suggest.
Yeah, I think that's good. So you see the whole spectrum of minions that you probably want to protect, right? And then I guess afterwards, all right, so since you framed it the first time, how are we framing the second aspect of this discussion?
I think we moved to how to protect it, right?
Okay.
Like, what are the ways in which you would protect it? And the easiest way, I think, the most obvious way, right, is you taunt. It's designed to protect your minions. If you think about protecting a minion on the board, you think about having a taunt, which is fine. Another way you protect it is by giving it more health. Especially if you're a priest, you give him more health, you attack to the face, now your opponent needs more stuff to remove it. Those are kind of, or like give it divine shield or something, right? Like actually what you would think of in normal human terms as protecting a minion.
Right.
But just as easily, and probably it actually happens more frequently, you protect a minion by trading your other minions or by using removal on your opponent's minions. Because once you have a minion on the board and your opponent doesn't remove it, you kind of can have the read, especially if it's an engine of some sort and your opponent wants to remove it. Your read is, well, my opponent can't remove it. Or it would cost my opponent some weird, absorbent amount of resources to remove it, and he's not willing to do that. So, in that case, the only way he removes it is if he has minions left on the board that ends up attacking that minion. So if you just get rid of his minions, well, now your engine's protected.
Right. And this is one thing that you always want to weigh. So we're sort of framing it in terms of protecting minions. And you can also, we can easily have this discussion on sort of like, what do you play around? Like, what are your reads as well? Because let's just say you're facing a hunter, right? And you give up the sort of the pressure a little bit if you clear minions a little bit. But you also want to think about, well, I want to protect this Boulderfist Ogre, and I don't want him to get an easy hunter's mark, right? Easy hunter's mark, and then bop his, like 2/2 little dude into my Boulderfist Ogre. So I'm going to do this to protect. And at the same time, you read the board state, and you also read sort of what you need in that situation. But if you want to protect your minion, then we get into this discussion of like, okay, I need to assess the game so far.
Yep. I think that's right. So it's not like what we're describing is, I think, what you would normally call, what everyone calls playing the game of Hearthstone, right?
Crazy.
Like, this should not be rocket science to anybody who's listening to this podcast. But it's also something that I think oftentimes people don't think about as consciously. And a lot of it, the people who think about it versus the people who don't think about it will set up their board better. They will conserve their resources better in order so that when a minion needs to be protected, they have the resources to protect that minion. So if I have a strategy, for example, of taking my salty dog and then going face with it, I will make sure the salty dog is not removed to the best of my ability. I will then make sure I have enough stuff in my hand and or on the board that I can use to trade so that I don't have to use the salty dog to kill any minions, and I don't leave any minions on the board afterwards, and my salty dog can keep going face.
Yeah.
And that involves a setup of not just on the board, but also what cards you keep and what cards you play earlier on.
Right. And this goes back to what we were talking about last week as well. You have so many things to think about in Hearthstone. It's just also good to have a checklist, right? And for this, if you keep on checking off the box and reminding yourself, like, I'm protecting this minion because I am going towards this goal, right? Yeah. Or you can look at the other way. This is my goal. Because of that, I need to protect this minion. Because of that, X, Y, and Z. And then you move out your turn. And then, so you don't get sort of stuck in the small kind of, like, you don't get tunnel vision, right? You want to make sure you have a full view of your entire play and your goal. So this way, you remind yourself 2 seconds, boom, and then you prevent yourself from making potential misplays.
Yeah. And it's all about the future too, right? So especially with things like an engine where you could get value out of it if you can protect the board. A lot of times you would choose not to play it until you have the board.
Yep.
And so that's something that some people will think about, some people won't, some people will overthink it and then not play it for the tempo when you really kind of just need a 1/4 on the board. Like there's a lot of considerations to be made. But one of the things that you should be thinking about is if I have a minion worth protecting and it's in my hand, when do I play it? And that goes into what I think you were suggesting earlier about baiting, right?
Yes.
Like one of the ways, and this is kind of a you don't normally think about it as protecting a minion, but how do you protect your Ironbark Protector? Well, you protect your Ironbark Protector from being hard removed by playing a Boulderfist Ogre beforehand, because that's going to get hard removed, and then your Ironbark Protector can come out, and your opponent would need to have in his hand 2 hard removals to make a difference, which is really like unlikely and difficult, as opposed to just 1 hard removal, which is kind of expected, especially if they haven't used one yet.
Yeah. And like I said, this is, if you're facing a mage who has had a very slow hand, has had a couple cards that he hasn't played in quite a while, you can, I don't know the exact percentages there, but you could be like, all right, well, I don't lose that much by just dropping this Boulderfist Ogre here, and there's a high chance that'll get removed, and the Iron Bark Protector suits the late game a lot better, right? And it's not just because of the additional stats, it's because of the taunt. Maybe the mage is putting pressure on you. So that's another way to protect, the Ironbark Protector, right? There's one way to protect minions on the board. There's another protecting your hand. And in both ways, you're either trying to extract value, you're trying to push more damage, whatever you need in that game scenario.
Yeah, and I think the last way, there's probably more ways, but the last way that I can think of where you protect a minion in your hand is kind of the same as what we were talking about before, but it has to do with the opposite. Not protecting a really big minion, but protecting a really small minion. If your opponent has a Yeti on the board, and you have 2 extra mana, and you've already played, like, I don't know, let's say a Yeti, or like a Spiteful Smith, or whatever, right? Something that's not going to die. And you have a Croc. Do you play the Croc? Well, it depends. If you have a way to deal 1 extra damage to the Yeti so that your 4 attack from your minions can trade with the Yeti, playing the Croc is the equivalent of dealing 1 damage. Is that worth it to you? Maybe you want to protect the Croc. Maybe the fact that the Croc can remove 3 tokens from the Paladin, or that the Croc can deal 2 damage of face damage every turn, is more important to you than the 1 damage that it can get by being on the board. The effectively 1 damage that it can get by being on the board. Because at that point, it's pretty much a 1/2 for all the use it's going to do you. And it's even worse if you have put out a Pit Fighter, and then you have 2 more mana. Definitely don't play the Croc. You're just giving the Croc to your opponent to save 4 health. Right? Like, unless you really need that 4 health, you're not going to play the Croc. And that protects the Croc. Not that the Croc is the most important minion you want to protect in the late game, but it's kind of a free protection, right?
It is, definitely. And once again, we're talking about this thing which can easily be categorized as just value, right? Here, it's just value. You're like, well, I get basically nothing from that Croc, and I'm just giving him a card. And in other instances, you can see, you do it for, you're protecting the card because you want face damage. But this is another one of those just broad categories that kind of encapsulates all the ideas that we've talked about. It's crazy how synergistic Hearthstone is, right?
Yep. And so I think this all ties back to what we were talking about. The first thing we talked about protecting a minion. You have to know why you're protecting a minion. If you have no real goals about protecting a minion, then you're probably spending resources that you should not be spending, because the minion is probably not doing all that much for you. And so, unless it's a really obvious thing to protect, like a Kodo Rider, yes, protect the Kodo Rider, it may not be worth protecting. And so, like, figure out what protecting a minion does for you, and then decide whether you're going, like, figure out what resources you need to spend to protect the minion. Because also, obviously, right, like, if you have, your opponent has a 3/2, you have 2 3/2s, you need to trade one of them into your opponent. One is a Sorcerer's Apprentice, one is a Bloodfen Raptor, you have no beast synergies. You throw the Raptor in. It's not difficult, because there's no cost to you to protect your engine minion. But other times there is a cost to you. Maybe it's not a Sorcerer's Apprentice you have on the board. Maybe it's a Pint-Sized Summoner. Well, you kind of rather have a 3/2 than a 2/2 on the board. So maybe you throw the Pint-Size into his 3/2 and you keep your Raptor. On the other hand, maybe you can get out a bigger minion the next turn if this guy survives. So now you have to think about what exactly the engine that you're protecting is worth.
Yeah, definitely. And remember, guys, even though Tiny Finn is very cute, it might not be a great reason to protect it.
I
If
always
if
protect the
your
tiny fin.
if your reason is to win.
No, no, no.
Okay,
Blizzard rewards you for protecting the tiny fin, and
gotcha.
Blizzard punishes people who kill tiny fins.
Mm.
It's just a well-known fact.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm glad this is in the programming, and I'm glad that you are making everyone aware of this.
I think a lot of people aren't aware of it, and it's really a shame. Blizzard just doesn't like we talked about this before, right? Blizzard just doesn't do a good job of telling people the like how the game works and the actual things that's happening with the game, especially in the arena. They
Yeah.
just it's not one of their like high priorities. They like sometimes get around to it, and sometimes they like wait for you to figure it out. And this is just one of the things that the community's kind of figured out by this point.
Well, this is us getting you that insider. Well, actually, everyone probably knows this, and I'm just
Just you,
I'm
it's
the
just
one
you,
being left
Merps.
behind.
Yeah, yeah. Don't spread your ignorance.
Sorry, man.
Okay, let's move on to, before we move on to the question of the GOAT, I want to thank all of our patrons, all of our Patreons for contributing in the month of February. Our top Patreons, so we still don't have a sponsor. I know we've been saying this like every Lightforge for like ever, but like we honestly still do not have a sponsor, and so the Patreons are and the Twitch subs are our sponsors effectively, and our top sponsors are 4P. Oh, speaking of 4P, how's Natasha doing on today's Valentine's Day?
Pretty well, I would assume. We are not together right now, but I have sent her some flowers, so that is how we're spending our Valentine's Day.
You hear that, guys? You hear that, guys? Some Patreons get special treatment over other Patreons, despite in theory everyone being a patron. Okay. Also, Kasir HG, our wonderful mod, Capsize Games, HT Rajan, Ingo, Paul H, Talon, who used to be called Matt, Terrence B, and Ugbog. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're thinking of contributing, the Patreon website is patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much. And now we can move on to the question of the GOAT. What do you have for us?
Happy Valentine's Day, ADWCTA.
Happy Valentine's Day to you too, GOAT.
Excellent. Now, I realize that that's not actually a question, so I'll just say today's Valentine's Day. I don't know if today is your perfect Hearthstone Valentine's Day, but tell me, if you were to write a script, what would be your perfect Hearthstone Valentine's Day?
But well, okay. I know I'm usually the person who's anti-fun and pro-playing Hearthstone, but I'm not sure Hearthstone and Valentine's Day are like the perfect fit in terms of what my ideal Valentine's Day would involve. I think it would involve like very little, if any, Hearthstone.
Okay. Okay.
It's just, I mean, okay. So I am using if you guys have been watching the stream, I have been using the card back from January for Valentine's Day. I've switched over from the BRM one to the lovely pink and purple hearts everywhere card back. I think it really sends a message to my opponent that despite my BMing, it's all with love. But I don't think my perfect Valentine's Day would involve any Hearthstone. Although this year, I guess we are spending Valentine's Day with Jaina.
Right. And the question was, what is your perfect Hearthstone Valentine's Day? So actually just...
So it's like non-existent?
Yes. I am, much like Valentine's Day forces you into mass consumerism, I am forcing you to answer the question, what is your perfect Hearthstone Valentine's Day? And I can give you some time and I will answer.
Okay, why don't you answer? I'm going to see where this is going.
Here is what I'm not even going to say should do. Here's what you have to do during Valentine's Day in the arena, okay? You have to be in the Valentine spirit when you draft, because Valentine's Day is a time for, friendship and love. And so you want to make sure every pick has a buddy in your deck, okay? So if you pick Ice Rager, you better get a Magma Rager to pair with him. And you know what? Much like how the universe is set up, sometimes a perfect fit doesn't happen, so you just have to make do, right? So when it comes time, you're just like, well, what's good with a Magma Rager? You're like, okay, Fire Ellie. you know, they have some things in common. Boom, buddies right there. If you get an Argent Squire, maybe, and here's what you have to do. Then you draft Silverhand Knight. That Squire pairs up with the Argent Squire, and then you need the Black Knight to pair up with the Silverhand Knight. Bam.
Merps, you are on a whole different level right now.
I know.
This is like next level analysis that I have not even begun to consider.
I know. See, this is why I wanted you to go first. So now your answer doesn't just like putter in comparison to mine, right?
I mean, okay, you got to give me some time, and then I'll go back and I'll write an algorithm and I'll figure out exactly who will pair with who, and then we can start a draft that way.
Perfect.
But I mean, it's Hearthstone. I don't know. Chat suggesting Mistress of Pain. But that's not how I view my Hearthstone cards and my relationship. It's not a Valentine's Day-y relationship that I have with Hearthstone. It's more of a very different kind of relationship. So I am once again giving really bad answers to questions from the goat. I feel like that's a theme.
It's okay. It's all right. You maybe this should have been your resolution instead of Year of the Priest, which you've already completed. It's Year of Don't Screw Up during the question from the goat.
Man, I need to pre-vet these questions. I need to be like, Merps, you got to give me like a week to properly prepare a response. You know what? We're gonna do that. We're gonna have a question from the goat next week, you know, as normal. But this time, I'm going to have at least 3 days to prepare a response. And so I will give a very good response to the next question. All right.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. Until then, I just want to remind everybody, including Natasha, who is hopefully not watching this and has better things to do. Merps is spending Valentine's Day with me, and with Hearthstone. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and Costco, which I went to previously.
And
spent a lot of time there.
And Costco.
That was my Valentine's Day meal. Yeah.
I feel like you need more. You need to do more than just send flowers to Natasha. I feel like there has to be some additional level of Valentine's Day thing happening.
Well, I'm sure there's a Costco where she's at too, and we could go together, and then it's like the same thing.
Oh yeah, you're just on the phone both at Costco.
Right, exactly.
And you can compare which Costco's better.
Well, no, I mean, they're like all the same, right? That's the whole point of Costco.
And so it feels like you're in the same place. I get
exactly.
It. I get
yeah.
it.
It's like that whole thing where, you know, if two people look at the same star, it's like all that sappy stuff.
Mm-hmm. But like you suck and you wouldn't be able to identify one star that you can both look at, so you guys use Costco.
See, that's the thing. Also, like, you know, we're both in places where light pollution is a real issue. Okay.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
There are not that many stars from where I am either.
No.
All right. Let's go on to Card Good Bad. We said we'd try to finish this in 40 minutes. We're not on track, but we're not that far behind. So
yes, we are.
Let's talk about Card Good Bad, where we tell you whether a card is good or bad. And today we're going to talk about eggs because it's Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day is a lot like Easter. So Dragon Egg and Nerubian Egg are two eggs that are featured prominently in the game of Hearthstone, which we all play. And they feature the same kind of idea, which is that nothing happens to it, and you can't attack with it, and it doesn't do anything until you break it. And then once you break it, something like pops out. So it's a cool concept, but let's talk about why they're... Let's start with they're not good. I don't want to get into a discussion of whether they're good or not, but let's talk about when they become good. At what point does a Dragon Egg or Nerubian Egg become good, Merps?
Sure. Dragon Egg, Nerubian Egg, you need activators, right? And activators come in many forms. So you can either buff up their attack, or you can taunt them up. Taunting and buffing their attack both work. So this is where you want to see... okay, you never really want Egg in your draft, but if you were to be presented with it, you want it at the end of your draft, where you can kind of see, okay, do I want this card, aka does it fit in my deck? If I have Argus, Sun Fury, Direwolf, all that stuff, then yeah, of course I want this egg. And there's also extra consideration for like classes as well, right? Warlocks with power overwhelming, egg is pretty damn good. So those are things you want to think about in terms of egg, but it really is just about number of activators.
Yep. And so how many number of activators?
Hmm. How many activators? So if we're talking about,
Let's say it's a non-mage class, so you can't ping your egg.
right, and also guys, pinging your egg is pretty sad.
Yeah.
That's really, really sad.
Unless it's at 0-1.
Yes.
Okay, for a dragon egg, you can ping your egg to get a 2-1, but still, you
Sure.
prefer not to do that. Like,
Right.
it's better than pinging his face, but that's kind of it.
Right. I think the point at which you're like, oh man, I can like get this to work a decent amount of times is about 5 activators.
Mm-hmm.
5 activators, and you're pretty happy. There's also things that you can consider like half activators, right? Or like conditional activators. If you have a Clockwork Gnome and a Mech Yeti, right? You're like, well, there's a chance for something to pop out of there. Right.
I think that's important to talk about the spare parts.
Yeah, spare parts are definitely a game changer.
Because there's 2 of them, right? Like there's the attack, which obviously gives it attack and allows it to attack, and then there's taunt, which essentially accomplishes the same thing.
Now, if you want to get even more complicated, there's a third one, reversing switch, that can work on.
Okay, it works on one of the eggs.
Yes, exactly.
Make sure you don't do it to a dragon egg. The dragon egg is about taking damage. It is not about actually dying.
Nope. It's like the Acolyte of Pain issue, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But so you want to see count up the number of activators, and you also want to see like, well, how good are these activators, or how sticky are these activators, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's something like a Master Swordsmith that not only easily dies, but is not guaranteed to hit on your egg, well, that's you shouldn't count that as an activator, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is something like Defender of Argus, or if it is something like a Dark Iron Dwarf, which just comes out of your hand, then yeah, that's really good, and you can get really good tempo, and also you get the additional bonus of just having a body out there that your opponent doesn't want to deal with, right?
Yep.
Whether it's Consecration, whether it's Flame Strike,
yep.
or whether
I was gonna bring that up because we haven't really talked about that, but that's something people do talk about a lot, right? Like that. Oh yeah, you know, if it gets consecrated or whatever. But I think it's good that we didn't talk about it in the beginning because I don't think it's that big of a deal. I very rarely put out an egg and I'm like, yay, consecration proof. It happens now and then. It's definitely a bonus, but you shouldn't be drafting this card thinking, okay, I'm a fast deck. I want something to be consecration proof or to be flame strike proof. Like, you have better cards to take for that. Or I would just say bite the bullet and just take more little stuff and get out even faster.
Right. A lot of times, if you're a fast deck, just go faster.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, if you're already really fast and are super aggressive, you probably just want cards that really help you be as aggressive as possible. So these cards, like we said, while it's not the worst, you definitely don't want eggs at the beginning of the draft for the reasons that we've stated.
Yep. And then we're gonna sneak this in because Merps wants to talk about it, and we're not doing a whole card good bad to this. Merps recently played a co-op with Hafu, and they drafted Eerie Statue. He is now the only person I know who has played with an Eerie Statue. I'm
the only person I know who was able to attack with the Eerie Statue.
Merps has even attacked once with the Eerie Statue.
It happened. It was on my account. It's amazing.
So, why don't you, as the foremost Eerie Statue expert of the arena, tell us a little bit about how good or how bad the Eerie Statue is?
It's really bad. Wow. It's pretty terrible. So, going back to the conversation with the egg, I was saying, oh, there's a couple ways to activate it. You could either taunt it or you could give it attack. You cannot give Eerie Statue attack to activate it. So you can basically just taunt it or silence it, right? Like you can silence it, which introduces something.
And you can't silence the egg.
Yes. So it introduces something that the egg didn't have. But at the same time, you're using up a silence, right? Yeah. You're using up a silence, which is something that's pretty useful.
Like unless it's Wailing Soul, that's actually something that costs like tempo.
That costs something, right? Like Owl is understated, Spellbreaker is understated, and even premium cards like Keeper for Druid, that's understated. It has versatility, but it's understated for using the silence. You have to use the silence on it. Silence is pretty tough to get, much harder than just adding attack to it. Taunt is not that easy either. So with Eerie Statue, a lot of times, yeah, you put it out there, but man, the condition to prevent it from attacking is so easy, right? You just have something on the board, anything on the board. Ancient Watcher, that the thing is, it's less of a commitment, right? While at the same time, still pretty bad. So a lot of you guys might be tempted. You're like, man, I could just draft this and kind of ride it, get the cards,
I'm
just
hoping
win.
you're wrong, and not a lot of the guys listening to this podcast would think that. I'm hoping we're really targeting this at like the handful of people who still think that there's something to be gained from an
No,
Eerie
no,
statue.
no, no, no. A lot of people still know that it's bad, but come on, isn't it human nature to know something is bad but still go for it? Especially go for it when you know it's bad.
Well, not for maybe.
Yeah.
I
No,
can't
you're
relate
talking.
when it comes to Hearthstone.
No, you're talking from a logical ADWCTA perspective. Okay, I'm talking from the actual human, blood pumping your
Oh yeah, I'm
veins.
not too familiar with that part.
No, you're definitely not. But people want to have fun, and I'm okay with it. But just realize that, wow, these two cards are really bad.
They're
Just
beyond the bad of like fun, let's do this kind of. It's not a raid
right,
leader.
right,
It's not a salty dog. It's not a Wind Fury Harpy.
right. And really, it's just looking at all the considerations, right? Like silence, attack, and taunt as well. And just looking at these things, how often they're presented in the arena, and how often you can get this stuff off.
Yep. Yep. And so, just for the record, Merps, your deck was a rogue deck, which is actually, I think, the best deck probably for an Eerie statue, because you have much more like small removal and like quick removal options. So there is that going for it. Although, did you have any taunt givers or silencers in the deck?
We had a defender,
Okay.
and that was about it.
Did you ever defender it?
Yeah, we did. It was
Oh,
glorious. We
nice.
defended it. There was other times where we could actually clear the board and then
Hmm.
get 7 attacks to the face in,
Yeah.
and then drop stuff, and then the Euro
Yeah.
statue goes back to the way it was.
So something I had forgotten until I saw that like parts of the run that you did with the Eerie statue is that Eerie statue, and I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening to the Lightforge don't actually know how much Eerie statue costs because they haven't thought about Eerie statue ever. It costs 4 mana, so it's it's actually really difficult to get out on the board until you have nothing else to play.
It really is.
You can't just sneak it in.
Right. Ancient Watcher you can sneak in
Yes.
at some points.
Yes.
Eerie Statue is just impossible.
Yes. Okay, so let's move on to my Valentine for the day, Jaina. We are playing with the Mage today after the Lightforge. We haven't done Mage in a while, but I still think Mage is the best class in this meta, just in terms of the sheer power that the Mage has and the flexibility of all of its cards. I think it makes it a better than Rogue, better than Paladin class, and I'll stand by it, even though I'm kind of in a slump with Mage personally.
Wow. Okay. I think that's interesting, just because I I know a lot of the other top arena streamers now consider Rogue,
Yeah.
which is funny because we've kind of been championing Rogue for a long time, and then as soon as you move to the Mage, everyone's like, ah, Rogue. So they could, they could just be following, or who knows, right? It could just be very
I'm just
diverse.
I'm ahead of the meta.
Yeah, dude, you're shaping the meta. Everyone else is just following, right?
It's not like I'm identifying that Mage is the best right now. It's more like I just declare Mage is the best, and then the whole meta changes until I'm right.
Wow, wow, it's a good thing you're staying grounded and humble.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, but
that's
what
good.
do you think? Are you with? Do you still think Rogue is on top? Because I know for a while we were like pretty much on the same page with Mage, but the meta has changed since we last talked about this in like the beginning of January.
Yeah, I'll say that personally, I still think Rogue is the most powerful just because of options, right? Because of early game flexibility and options, I think. I do agree that Mage has a certain power level that is just kind of that you can't equal, right? And that comes from cards like Ethereal Conjurer, which gives you mage spells, which are ridiculously good. Flame Strike, which is still the powerhouse it always was. Hard removals, a ping that doesn't take away your life, like the Rogue or the Druid. and you can just get into this value game with a mage and just get obliterated, right?
Yep.
Because yeah, and mages also have, it'd be one thing if they had very sort of weak early game, but mages have good early game.
Very
Definitely
good
not.
early game.
Yeah, very good. Not like rogue tier, right? But still
Right.
very good and very annoying cards as well into things like Snow Chugger. Like small drops that have added benefits, Sorcerer's Apprentice for tempo as well. So they have all these good cards, and that's what makes them really powerful. I just think it's below the rogue because of the early game flexibility. That's it.
Okay. All right. That's fair. And so that's the mage, guys. We'll see how good our mage run goes. I have very high hopes for the mage. I like you said, right? Good early game cards, which means you don't fall behind. If you have, I would say in like more than half of the drafts for the mage, it's pretty hard for you to actually fall behind. And then the mage is, I think, the best class at playing without the board. So that's a huge bonus in your win rate, because as the game gets, as you get more swingy cards, which seems to happen at every expansion, there's more chance that a good player will be off the board.
Yep.
And so you want the ability to kind of get back on the board. And that used to be one of the reasons why Shaman was so good back in Classic, until they started releasing less and less cards for the Shaman that actually lets them get back on the board, and more just regular power cards. While for the Mage, they've continued to release get back on the board cards. So we'll see how we do. And I think, do you have anything else to...
That's it. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone out there. Hope you guys are having a great weekend, and we'll see you next week, right?
See you next week. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Bye, guys.
Happy Valentine's Day.